Now, amidst the horror of the last few months, we've seen shifting attitudes, I would say, in Western public opinion. People have seen too much to unsee, heard too much to unhear, read too much to unread, and that has had a profound impact on Western public opinion. But the Israeli state is not stupid, and it is aware that it depends on Western states, not least the United States, for arms, diplomatic support, aid, political support. And it has deployed at state level an extensive attempt to, I suppose, contain the political consequences of people being horrified at mass slaughter. Now, with that in mind, I'm really delighted to be speaking to the brilliant journalist Lee Fang, who is a great investigative journalist, brilliant political journalist, who writes on a whole range of different subjects and has a Substack. Please do check out the Substack. Do click on it, support it, and you can see the kind of really kind of in-depth journalistic work that he's been doing on this and so many other topics. So, Lee, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Owen, it's really good to join you. Thanks for having me.
I just want to start with, so you did this actually a few months ago, and it was actually you published partly in the Guardian newspaper as well, the work that you did. And this was concerning. I mean, this is the Amichai Chikli, who's the Likud minister, who has been leading a targeted push to counter critics of Israel. Can you just explain, what did you find, basically? What was this about?
Well, we took a look at, I did this with a close friend of mine, co-author Jack Paulson. We took a look at this government entity, this government agency, in the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, led by Amichai Chikli. And it's basically the reboot of a very controversial public relations effort. Now, the Israeli government has its own separate budget for public relations, for, they fly a lot of people in to the country to, lobby them and show them, the Israel side of the story. They run television advertisements around the world. They do a lot of the traditional PR that many governments that, are in controversial kind of arrangements with the U.S., that's all normal. That's a separate kind of category. What we took a look at is something special. It's something that was launched back in 2017 that was positioned as a mass consciousness raising effort that would kind of go in as a, quote, PR commando unit to go after and go on the offensive against Israel's perceived political enemies, to kind of attack efforts by activists to call for boycotts and sanctions, that type of thing, to kind of create like online troll armies to criticize celebrities, to pass legislation that was favorable to Israel, that would be a little bit more nimble and covert. Now, this received a lot of coverage within Israel at the time, a lot of pushback. Some of their efforts were incredibly successful, others perhaps not. Their troll army didn't really come together. So this piece looks at the history of this specialized unit. It's gone through a lot of different reboots and names. It was originally Kela Shlomo or David Sling. It was then renamed Concert Together for Israel. It's now under the name Voices for Israel. And it was shut down twice. And just a few weeks after October 7th, and this is what the piece really explores, this controversial PR unit essentially was rebooted and flush with Israeli government money. And this unit is controversial in part because Israel has been very careful, consciously. This has been a debate within government ministers and within government leaders about not registering under various lobbying laws in the countries that they operate in, particularly the US, that when they want to kind of use this specialized government agency, government-funded group to shape legislation and public opinion, they don't want to disclose, they don't want to kind of follow the kind of basic transparency laws that many foreign lobbyists and foreign governments have to abide by. So they commingle a lot of the government money with private sector donations. they put it into various nonprofits, and they funnel it to allied groups, particularly in the UK and Europe. And we took a look only at the US, but they also have a wing that looks at Europe. And in the weeks after October 7th, with the protests at Ivy League universities, there was a demand to say, hey, this is so important for American political culture. This is where every major American politician goes to school at, Yale and Harvard and the other Ivy Leagues. This is where the mid-tier and lower-tier colleges look to. There's a mimicry in American culture that whatever the elite colleges adopt culturally, politically, policy-wise, it flows downstream to the other colleges. This is what is a taste setter for American culture overall, that celebrities and Americans of all stripes look towards these universities for guidance on how to act and behave on any major issue. And this is really the discussion within government ministers in the Knesset. And they said, look, we've got to push back. We've got to fight these students. How do we do it? So let's reboot this, Kela Shlomo or concert voices. They still use interchangeably all the different various names for this entity. And, we don't have a full picture of all the ways that they've spent their money, but this series of reporting that I've been doing with Jack, we look at government records, at some of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament debate. Some of these groups have uploaded videos on YouTube and social media, basically discussing their accomplishments and how they're working with the Israeli government, and other, pieces of information that we've kind of assembled to paint as much of a picture as we can of what they're doing. And, one of the organizations that they have historically funded with this Israeli group is, they fund many different nonprofits in the U.S., many Christian Zionist organizations, many advocacy groups. But one of the groups that they fund is a think tank in New York called the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism Policy. That's a mouthful. So it also goes by ISGAP. ISGAP, this was originally kind of a think tank at Yale University. They were booted from Yale University because they were perceived as not academic at all, as kind of a pro-Israel lobbying group, and it was not appropriate for it to be associated with the university. So it was booted from the university for advocacy reasons. And now it's basically claimed credit for that infamous hearing back in December with Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard, and others being accused of supporting anti-Semitism on their college campuses, or not doing enough to condemn and sanction pro-Palestinian protests. And we don't have to go into the details of that, but one of the kind of interesting takeaways that no one in the media covered at the time is that ISGAP, this group that's historically funded by this controversial PR unit of the Israeli government, had given reports to the Republican legislators. And three of those Republican legislators actually cited ISGAP just moments before that epic confrontation that went viral all over the world between Congresswoman Elise Stefanik and Claudine Gay. And they had been working with the congressional staff, and they were at a kind of meeting with some of their supporters and donors. And in one of the videos that we link in that piece, they took credit. They said that this was our work. This is how we shape hearts and minds around this issue. So that's just one of the many examples that we look through the piece, and they've done a stunningly successful job in kind of avoiding the public limelight. A lot of these kind of advocacy efforts, although I'm sure many different organizations in support of Israel would do so on their own volition without any guidance from the Israeli government, but the role of a foreign government in shaping these debates on college campuses, in legislatures, they're again trying to pass legislation, in kind of shaping the social media content moderation policies and the way we talk about the war in Gaza and the Israeli state. There's been so little reporting about the role of the Israeli government in kind of setting the contours of this whole discussion.
And we've seen ISGAP try to redefine, push laws which redefine anti-Semitism to include, it's this conflation, critiques of the state of Israel, its behavior. I mean, you looked at these other groups, Voice of Israel, Cyberwell, which is this pro-Israel, nominally anti-disinformation group led by former Israeli military intelligence officials. which became a official trusted partner to TikTok and Meta. So what's going on there? What they're kind of trying to push and promote via that through social media, I suppose.
Well, as I mentioned, this has been going on since 2017.
Right.
It was this PR effort this kind of covert PR effort through the Israeli government. It used to be housed in this controversial mini agency within the Israeli government called the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. It later morphed into the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. And over the years, we've got kind of a list of the different staffers and Israeli intelligence officials that have worked with these agencies. Well, back in 2022, the same leadership from the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the folks that helped run the first iterations of Voices for Israel or Kelish Shlomo, or however they want to call themselves these days, they went off and formed this NGO, Cyberwell, that it basically portrays itself as one of the many kind of constellation of anti-hate, anti-disinformation NGOs. And, we've seen over the last couple of years, many of the big social media platforms, they get criticism for the type of hate speech or, controversial speech or disinformation or foreign intervention on their platforms. And, they don't have a good response to this. And perhaps for financial reasons, perhaps for liability or political reasons, they end up outsourcing a lot of the censorship work to these non-government organizations, saying, hey, look, these members of civil society, they can do a better job than us. How about they do it for us? That's very fraught. That's something that I've written about a lot. There are many special interest groups that cast themselves as independent, non-government agencies that are just concerned about hate and problematic speech. And then they say, oh, TikTok, Meta, you have issues. Let's help you remove bad content from your platform. It really kind of opens the door for all kinds of manipulation. I've written about this with the context of Ukraine and some of the issues around the pandemic. Well, Israel is essentially doing the same thing. These former intelligence officers and former concert officials formed this group, and they're setting moderation policies. They're kind of sending lists of tweets and TikToks that they want removed. And you look at the criteria that they're using. Now, of course, there is a lot of hate on these platforms, but the type of criteria that they're looking for is often narrowly the type of content that is seen as just critical to the IDF, critical to Israel. They claim that anyone who disputes the claims that came out, in the weeks after October 7th, that 40 babies were beheaded or put into ovens, these kind of claims that were made by and echoed by Joe Biden and Israeli leadership. Anyone who disputes this and says, hey, there's no evidence, multiple investigations have shown that this never happened. You've seen the reporting. I'm sure your listeners have seen the reporting as well. They claim that this is a form of Holocaust denial, that anyone who disputes this claim is engaging in anti-Semitism, and therefore that type of content needs to be removed from these platforms. Now, this is its own form of disinformation, but it's cast in this veneer of fighting hate speech. I mean, it's very clever in what they're doing. It's not unique. There are other special interest groups around the world that kind of mimic these strategies, but it seems to be very effective because they've won this very privileged place as a trusted partner for these platforms, and they're actively shaping the type of content that we're allowed to see on the social media.
I was really interested in in terms of the activities of this ministry. One of the kind of something which has kind of come out of this is hundreds of fake accounts posting pro-Israel or anti-Muslim content. I mean, I notice whenever I tweet anything to do with Gaza, Israel, you'll just get, I mean, it's just, it doesn't come across. I know people often do this on social media. There's a problem. A certain type of person, whenever they get criticized, they just respond that these are bots. When actually real people do actually just disagree with you sometimes. That comes with the territory. So I don't want to lean too much into that. You often get that people go, "You're a bot." You're like, it's just like a person. But nonetheless, you can just sometimes look at it and be like, they just looks like AI generated faces with just kind of odd obsessive patterns of social media usage. Yeah, I'm just interested in that the way. I mean, I know the Diaspora Affairs Minister denied involvement in that campaign. But it's such a cheap way because you kind of just spam like lawmakers and public officials and public figures or journalists. It's not actually, it's actually, if to do that is a very low investment and probably does actually have an impact. So I just wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's such an interesting debate because you're right. This is often kind of the big distraction. Anyone who's dealing with tough criticism online will say it's a bot. But look, the New York Times was able to identify that Democratic legislators, particularly Black Democrats, were being targeted with this concerted campaign from the same sponsor of this PR unit that I'm mentioning, the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. They hired this public relations firm to use artificial intelligence, the kind of deep fakes to create fake images, and artificial intelligence to kind of populate these fake accounts with authentic looking dialogue to, pressure legislators to support Israel, to, they're kind of spreading some anti-Muslim hate. It's categorically the exact type of foreign disinformation that we heard endlessly about from 2016 with Russian, attempts to influence the 2016 election. We had hearing after hearing on Capitol Hill. We had, the leaders, the platforms testifying under oath, and, endless media coverage over this. Credit to the New York Times for reporting on this, but other than the New York Times and my story in The Guardian, I've seen virtually zero coverage of this, zero reaction from Capitol Hill. It seems to be a little bit of a double standard. I mean, this is $2 million. Like, this is far beyond what the Russians even reportedly spent in 2016. This is in the course of a war. This is in the course of congressional debate about what to do about providing additional military support to Israel. There's a big vote back in April on providing additional military support. This kind of disinformation happened at a time when they were attempting to influence that vote. I mean, this triggers a lot of lobbying disclosures. It certainly should revive the same type of discussion we've had about foreign influence. But, like for a lot of these issues, despite well-documented foreign attempts to influence public debate and public policy, for whatever reason, there's not much scrutiny from the media or from legislators.
I do think it's interesting because the Russia thing has gone too far, I would say. Lots of certain type of Democrat has used Russia as a crutch to explain any political phenomena that they don't like.
Absolutely. And yet, I don't want, I don't desire anyone to exaggerate. I think there should be a consistent standard applied across the board.
Well, that's what I mean. It's the hypocrisy of it. So you get on the one hand that certain type of centrist often who will say, Russia's done everything. Russia's done this. That's why we lost in 2016. That's why Brexit happened. That's quite a common thing in Britain. You got, Brexit happened. It was Russia. And then as soon as you start even discussing the idea of Israeli interference, it's kind of, no, that's completely unacceptable. You can't discuss this. I really
it's identical in the US. It's incredible how similar our conversations are.
They behave exactly the same. I've seen, the social media posts are uncannily similar. So, I mean, it's just interesting this, because you posted this really interesting piece of your blog. You got in touch with Cyberwell because they've been, they were there created to supposedly help moderate social media and remove harmful content, but actually they're censoring accurate and benign criticisms of Israel. You reach out to them, they delete their bios and then they block you, and they lied saying that you had never reached out for comment.
We sent so many requests for comment, including, really detailed list of questions, just basic journalism. They lied to The Guardian. They tried to kind of get a correction on our piece. No correction was posted by The Guardian because we didn't get anything wrong. We were very rigorous in terms of the journalism methods that we used. And they right after we contacted them, they used to have a bio page noting that they were IDF intelligence officers and on the staff and advisory board, including some of the very high level intelligence officers. Poof, gone after we request for comment. And rather than simply responding to us in good faith, I get blocked by them on Twitter. So I find it funny. I mean, it's just, this group is very savvy in terms of portraying itself as just a bona fide anti-hate group. And again, I want to reiterate, there is a lot of terrible anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hate you see on these platforms. It is a problem with no easy solution. But what they're doing here is conflating. It's almost like an intelligence operation in the sense that they're conflating any criticism of the Israeli military, Israeli intelligence, and government policies with hatred for a people. And that's incredibly dangerous because, you know, any American, any person should be able to criticize any government, including our own. That's part of the protections with the First Amendment. But what they're attempting to do, not just with the social media monitoring and moderation, but with this push with their kind of coalition partners to pass this new definition of anti-Semitism. You know, there was a big House vote 2 months ago. They've passed kind of copycat bills in state legislatures and local government agencies that codifies the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, that conflates criticism of the government of Israel with hatred of the Israeli people, basically saying that you can't, that's a form of illegal discrimination. Now, each of these pieces of legislation are slightly different, but if you look at the pieces of legislation that they helped pass in Georgia and Arizona, they've updated the hate crime statute, meaning that certain forms of criticism of the state of Israel, saying something like the state of Israel is racist. You know, I can say that about the American government. I could say that about the British government. But what they're saying is that if you say this about the Israeli government, that could actually lead to increased prison time. This is kind of unprecedented what they're doing, and it's dangerous too because it's not. I don't think this serves the cause of anti-hate, of seeing people as more human. You know, we have a dehumanizing process in all the social media where people are kind of stereotyping and smearing each other. We have this rising polarization and hate in society. I don't think this solves it by shutting down any criticism of the state of Israel.
Well, it's deeply irresponsible because anti-Semitism, as you know, is a very serious problem and evil. I think all the evidence shows it's rising. And what this conflation is doing is making people stop believing in the reality of anti-Semitism. You get all too many people now who just, I mean, people just, it undermines faith and belief in the existence of anti-Semitism. I mean, I just finally, I mean, what impact do you think this, I mean, it's difficult to quantify, I guess, but what do you think is, because we can see with the polling, I mean, in Britain where, you know, from October, the polling showed people opposed Israel's onslaught by a large margin, even by mid-October. And the vast majority of Britons think Israel is committing war crimes. The vast majority of Britons support an end to arms sales. Now, I know in the US, criticism of Israel has largely been seen traditionally quite verboten. That has changed, and polling suggested more Americans than not think Israel's committing genocide. And actually, amongst Biden supporters, a very large majority of people think Israel is committing genocide. So you've seen a very profound shift in public attitudes, which is particularly concentrated amongst younger Americans who use social media. And I think social media has played a big role. And the Biden administration has not exactly hidden the fact they want to take action against TikTok because of that, because lots of younger Americans, up to and including seeing Israeli soldiers posting their war crimes and support for war crimes on social media. I think that's been one radicalizing impact. What do you think, though? Is this basically, do you think this is a futile, desperate attempt to kind of push back a tide which is just becoming too overwhelming? Or do you think actually it is having a pretty sizable impact in stopping the dam from bursting, stigmatizing critique of the Israeli state, given the gravity and the scale and the unapologetic intent expressed by Israeli leaders, what we're seeing in Gaza? What do you think?
Well, you know, it's a tough question. Here's what I know and here's what I don't know. What I know from this reporting is that they have hit tangible goals. They passed legislation. They've, you know, I didn't even get into it, but, you know, they're funding other kind of quasi-government agencies that are funding traditionally apolitical Jewish student groups on campus to basically act as, you know, as monitors, as groups that are working in concert with these government agencies to spy on.
I meant to ask you, actually, so I did mean to ask you about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I'm just saying what we know in terms of, like, they're politicizing these Jewish student groups and asking them to monitor pro-Palestinian groups and to lobby these university administrations to get them kicked off campus. And in some cases, they're being successful. You know, they're Students for Justice Palestine, some of these other organizations that are being removed from college campuses. We do know that they are successful in terms of shaping the content moderation policy. So, people are seeing a lot of really eye-opening, first-person accounts from the war in Gaza, from both Palestinians and from, as you mentioned, from IDF soldiers. I think that's actually some of the most impactful social media, because beyond the spin, beyond what the government ministry and their spokespeople and embassy spokespeople say in our media every day on cable news, you go and see what the IDF commanders on the ground are saying, and it's diametrically opposite in terms of what their motives and goals are, in terms of ethnic cleansing or removing Palestinians as a people from this territory. I think that's incredibly impactful. It's hard for me to measure because I also know that there are big segments of TikTok social media that have been removed. Like, what if they hadn't been successful in removing so much content from social media? Would the public opinion be in a different place? It's impossible to say because we can't rewind and play that different possibility. So it's true that the ground is shifting. Israel consciously, and I mean Israel in terms of a lot of it, the government ministries, the politicians who really study this, and much to Israel's credit, the reason we were able to do a lot of this reporting is that they do have these open debates in the Knesset, and we were just watching, transcribing, and translating these debates to better understand their strategy. And what they say is that they study what happened in South Africa with the apartheid regime there. That's why they're so focused on the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, because that was part of the strategy by activists that helped shift the ground in South Africa. That's part of why they're so obsessed with college campuses, because
they know it's effective. They see the precedent. They know it's effective.
The tip of the spear in terms of changing South African policy came from Columbia University. That actually led the nation back in the 80s. That school led the nation in changing public opinion because they were some of the first big encampments against South Africa. And so they don't want to see this parallel. They're doing everything they can to stop the Columbia University anti-apartheid protests against Israel. Now, so far, in this sense, it's been very different from South Africa. They've passed these laws restricting boycotts and sanctions. They've got the police to, and I wouldn't say it's just Israel. There's a lot of democratic, or organic activity that's pro-Israel that's not tied to the Israeli government. But it's again, it's multi-factor. But they've gotten the encampments cleared at Columbia. So they're very conscious of this history, and they're doing active measures to make sure that history is not repeated. And in some cases, they're incredibly successful, despite what you're mentioning in terms of this shifting public opinion and debate that's much more critical about the role of the occupation, the role of these government policies, anger at the mass slaughter of civilians. I don't know. It's hard for me to answer.
Well, it's also it's deterrence, isn't it? I mean, when you take, various students' action is taken against them, then it has a deterrence effect. People look at that and they feel scared that will happen to them. It deters other people to speak out. That's what they're doing, isn't it? They're trying to prevent critical mass, basically, that you just allow these protests to grow unfettered. And whereas they go, well, actually, look, these people suffer consequences. I care about this, but I'm worried about the impact it will have on my life. I mean,
and that's why there are so many organizations that kind of dox students, that try to make them unemployable, that kind of try to intimidate them. I think that's having waning effect. I think a lot of people are like, look, I kind of know if I engage in certain forms of nonviolent, humanistic protest, I'm still going to be smeared. And I should say there are a lot of bad actors on the pro-Palestinian side that have misbehaved. But I don't think they define the mass. I've gone to a lot of these rallies. I've interviewed a lot of these activists. The average protester here just wants peace. They want a democratic society. I don't think they hate Israel. They hate these policies. But of course, there is a fringe that is extreme, and I think it does promote a very dangerous message. What Israel tries to do is say that everyone is part of that community that has that kind of angry pro-Palestinian message. I don't think that's true. That's the attempt. But we'll see. I think there just needs to be a greater dialogue. As you said, it's verboten to even talk about these things in the United States, and it's unfortunately true, especially in the elite media. I'm very fortunate that The Guardian was our publishing partner in some of this reporting, but there just needs to be a lot more discussion.
I agree. And I think this is why your work's so important. I think showing the mechanics of all this, how it works, makes a big impact. There's that expression, you don't want to know how sausages are made. And the Israeli state definitely does not want people to see how the sausages are being made here. And it's just showing the kind of the mechanics of it and how this actually works, how it actually operates. I think makes it much less effective. It's really important. It's a very big democratic responsibility that I think you've done with your journalism, which is what journalism is at its best, really. Pulling the curtain, showing what's actually happening, challenging, often quite powerful and quite scary, figures, and that's what this work has so brilliantly done. Do make sure you check out. I've got the link in the description, so do click on Lee's work. It is very courageous, important work, and I do think it is making a big contribution to shifting the tide on all of this. Leave your comments, subscribe, press like as ever. But Lee, honestly, thank you so much, and thanks for your great work.
Oh, and thanks for everything you do. And this was such a nice conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. It's a pleasure, man.